Eleanor found herself standing in an expanse of endless light, yet a deep sorrow weighed heavy on her heart. She wasn't sure if she was dreaming or if this place was real, but one thing was undeniable. He was there. Before her stood Jesus, his presence radiating an overwhelming peace, yet his expression was somber. She wanted to speak, to tell him of the world's suffering, the confusion, the growing darkness she had seen creeping into every corner of society. But before she could form the words, he shook his head. "They do not ask me." His voice was both gentle and firm. "They seek answers. From the world, but not from me." Eleanor's heart clenched. She had always thought people were simply lost, looking for truth in the wrong places, but now she understood they weren't just lost. They had stopped looking altogether. They had replaced faith with reason, trust with skepticism, and the voice of God with the noise of the world. Before she could respond, the light around her shifted, the ground beneath her disappeared, and suddenly she was falling, not into darkness, but into a vision. It swallowed her whole, wrapping around her senses like an unbreakable tide, and then she saw it. The truth hidden beneath the surface of reality. A war was raging, not a war of nations, not a war of flesh and blood, but a war far more dangerous. A war for the hearts and minds of humanity, and most of the world didn't even realize they were in the middle of it. As Eleanor's vision cleared, she found herself standing in the middle of a crowded street. But something was wrong. The people around her moved through their daily routines, unaware of the heavy chains shackled to their souls. She could see them even though the people themselves could not. These weren't physical chains. They were invisible bonds, forged by generations of pain, resentment, and deception. She turned, scanning the crowd, and suddenly she saw it. A divide so deeply embedded in their hearts that it had become part of their very existence. It wasn't just a difference in skin color or culture. It was something more sinister. She saw groups of people, Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, each carrying burdens they didn't fully understand. The Black community carried wounds passed down through time, some fresh, some ancient, yet all carefully cultivated by unseen forces. She could hear the whispers slithering through their minds like serpents. They will never see your worth. They will always look down on you. Hold on to your anger. Never forgive. Meanwhile, the white community bore a different weight, one of guilt, shame, and confusion. The same dark voices whispered into their ears. You are responsible for everything. You must carry the sins of the past. You can never do enough to atone. Eleanor gasped as the full horror of the deception settled into her soul. This division wasn't natural. It was engineered. The enemy had been working for centuries, planting seeds of discord, twisting history, magnifying wounds, and distorting truth. It wasn't about race. It had never been about race. It was about control. She turned to Jesus, her heart pounding. "Lord, don't they see? Don't they understand they are being used?" Jesus looked at her, sorrow deep in his eyes. "No, Eleanor, they do not see because they do not ask me." At that moment she realized the terrifying truth. The world was at war, but the battle wasn't fought with weapons or armies. It was fought in the mind, in the heart, in the soul, and the enemy had been winning because people had been too blind to recognize their true enemy. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face. She wanted to scream, to shake them awake, to tell them that they were all brothers and sisters, children of the same Creator, that their hatred was a carefully crafted lie, but she couldn't. This was only a vision, a warning. "Come, Eleanor," Jesus said softly. "There is more I must show you." And with that, the vision shifted again. As the scene shifted once more, Eleanor found herself standing in a vast, endless space. But this was no ordinary place. It pulsed with energy, with light and potential. She turned, and her breath caught in her throat. Before her stretched a magnificent hall, unlike anything she had ever seen. It was filled with countless souls, beings of light, shimmering with a radiance that carried purpose, promise, and divine design. Each one was unique, each one precious. Some glowed with an intensity that spoke of great destinies, while others flickered uncertainly, their light dimming before it even had the chance to shine. "Who are they, Lord?" Eleanor whispered in awe. Jesus stood beside her, his expression both sorrowful and full of love. "These are the ones who have yet to be born. Each is sent with a purpose, each carries gifts meant to shape the world. But from the moment they enter the earth, the enemy begins his work." Eleanor watched in stunned silence as the vision shifted again. She saw these souls descend into the world, their light pure and untainted, but the moment they took their first breath, an unseen force descended upon them. The enemy wasted no time. Some were born into homes of love, guided toward the calling God had placed in their souls. But others, oh, how her heart ached for them, were born into chaos, into brokenness, into darkness, so thick they could barely see who they were meant to be. She watched as the enemy whispered poisonous lies into their ears from infancy. "You are not enough. You are unworthy. You are unloved." For some, those lies took root early, suffocating their true identity before they could even understand it. She saw children searching for love in places that could never give it, chasing validation in temporary things, money, fame, power, the approval of the world. Others were crushed by comparison, burdened by the weight of expectations that were never meant to define them. And then she saw something even more terrifying. Society itself was part of the enemy's plan. The world was designed to confuse, to weaken, to strip people of their divine purpose. Some were taught their worth came from their appearance. Others were told they had value only if they were intelligent, successful, or wealthy. And for many, their identity was rewritten entirely, shaped by the opinions of others, dictated by culture, by systems that never had their best interests at heart. Eleanor turned to Jesus, her voice trembling. "Lord, they don't even know who they are." Jesus placed a hand on her shoulder. His voice was filled with both sorrow and unwavering truth. "That is the enemy's greatest weapon, Eleanor. Not war, not famine, not even death, but deception. He does not need to destroy them physically. He only needs to make them forget who I created them to be." Tears burned in Eleanor's eyes as she watched the tragedy unfold before her. People were lost, not because they lacked strength, but because they had been convinced they had none. But then, a spark. In the midst of the darkness, she saw them, a remnant. They were scattered, small in number, but unmistakable in presence. These were the ones who had broken free, who had remembered who they were, who had refused to be shaped by the world's lies. Their light cut through the shadows, revealing the chains binding those around them. "These are my warriors," Jesus said, his voice filled with both hope and power. "They do not fight with swords or strength, but with truth. And the enemy fears them more than anything." Eleanor's heart pounded. The battle for identity was the real war, and the only way to win was to remind people of the truth, that they were not accidents, not worthless, not forgotten. They were chosen, they were loved, they belonged to God. She turned to Jesus, fire burning in her soul. "Lord, what must I do?" Jesus looked into her eyes, his answer simple but undeniable. "Tell them." And just like that, the vision shifted once more. The air around Eleanor grew heavier, the warmth of Jesus' presence still with her, yet the world around her shifted once more. She was no longer in the great hall of souls, no longer witnessing the battle for identity. Instead, she found herself standing in the middle of a city unlike any she had ever seen before. The buildings stretched toward the sky, sleek and metallic, their surfaces illuminated by glowing screens that pulsed with messages in a language she didn't recognize. The streets were pristine, almost too perfect, yet eerily silent. Despite the thousands of people moving in every direction, there was no laughter, no conversation, no emotion. The people walked in perfect synchronization, their eyes locked on invisible streams of data projected before them. Something was deeply, terribly wrong. "Lord, where am I?" Eleanor whispered. Jesus stood beside her, his face sorrowful yet firm. "This is the world as it will be if they do not wake up." Her stomach twisted. At first glance, the city seemed peaceful, safe, orderly, efficient. But as she looked closer, she saw the truth hidden beneath the surface. People no longer made choices. Their lives were dictated to them, where they worked, what they believed, how they lived. The screens above them displayed messages of unity, security, and progress, yet behind those words, Eleanor felt something cold and oppressive. Then she saw him. High above the city, projected onto massive, towering screens, was the face of a man. Charismatic, powerful, trusted. The people looked up at him with devotion, with obedience, not out of love, but out of something far more dangerous. Blind faith. "Who is he?" Eleanor asked, a chill running down her spine. Jesus' voice was steady, yet filled with deep sorrow. The one they will follow, the one they will trust, the one who will lead them into chains they cannot see. She wanted to look away, to deny what she was seeing, but something inside her knew the truth. This was no ordinary leader. This was the one the world would embrace, believing he had come to save them. Yet he was leading them toward their destruction. Eleanor's heart pounded as she watched what unfolded next. People stood in endless lines, moving forward like machines, stepping up to receive something. At first she couldn't see what it was, but as she got closer, her breath caught in her throat. A small implant, inserted just beneath the skin. "Lord," her voice broke, "is this the mark?" Jesus shook his head. "Not yet, but this is how they will be led to accept it, step by step, deception by deception. First, they will make it convenient, then they will make it necessary, and finally, they will make it mandatory." Eleanor watched, horror washing over her. The people did not resist. They did not question. They accepted it willingly. It was for their safety, for their convenience, for the greater good. And by the time they realized the chains around them, it would be too late. Tears filled Eleanor's eyes. She turned to Jesus, desperation in her voice. "Lord, how do we stop this? How do we wake them up?" His eyes held both sorrow and hope. "Some will listen, some will not, but those who know my voice will not be deceived. You must tell them, warn them before the time comes." Suddenly, the city around her began to fade, the towering buildings dissolving into mist. The silence was replaced by the sound of wind rushing through an open field. Eleanor stood beside Jesus, looking out over the horizon. The weight of everything she had seen pressed down on her soul, suffocating, unbearable. Or they don't see it, they don't know. How can they choose when they don't even realize they are being deceived? Jesus turned to her, his gaze both firm and gentle. "That is why my people must speak. That is why the truth must be louder than the lie." And as Eleanor stood there, staring at the two paths before her, one wide and easy, leading to destruction, the other narrow and difficult, leading to him, she knew the choice had always been theirs. The air around Eleanor shifted once more. The towering city of deception faded, and suddenly she found herself standing in an open field stretching far beyond what her eyes could see. A deep, endless horizon lay before her, bathed in golden light. Yet she felt the weight of everything she had witnessed pressing against her soul. Beside her, Jesus stood in quiet strength, his presence radiating peace, though his eyes held a deep sorrow. Eleanor turned to him, her voice trembling. "Lord, what now?" He said nothing at first, only raised his hand toward the horizon. As Eleanor followed his gaze, she gasped. Before her, two paths emerged. One was wide and smooth, its surface gleaming under the warm glow of the sun. It stretched far into the distance, inviting, comfortable, effortless. People walked this road without hesitation, their faces calm, their pace steady. They laughed, they smiled, they moved forward without questioning where they were headed. Yet, as Eleanor looked closer, her heart clenched in terror. She saw darkness creeping at the edges of this path, silent, patient, waiting. The further people walked, the more the light around them dimmed. They did not see it. They did not notice that the road that had begun so beautifully was leading them into shadow. And just as the last light faded, just as the darkness swallowed them whole, they were gone. Eleanor staggered backward. "Lord, They don't even know, she whispered. Jesus' voice was solemn. Most will choose this path, Eleanor. It is easy, it is safe, it requires no sacrifice. But in the end, it leads to destruction. A deep grief welled up in Eleanor's soul. She turned away, her heart too heavy to bear it any longer. That's when she saw the second path. This one was narrow, winding, and rough. Jagged rocks jutted out from the ground, and steep hills rose and fell along its way. There were places where the road was barely visible, as if it had been forgotten. Yet at the end of this path, there was light. Not just any light, a radiant, overwhelming brilliance that could not be dimmed. And there, at the very end, stood Jesus, his arms open, waiting for those who would come. Unlike the first road, few walked this one. Some stumbled, some fell to their knees, weary from the journey, but they did not turn back. They pressed on, though the world mocked them, though they bore the weight of rejection, though the wind howled against them. They knew where this road led. And as Eleanor watched, something stirred inside her, a flicker of hope. But Lord, she turned to him, her voice filled with both sorrow and urgency. How do we help them see? How do we wake them up before it's too late? Jesus placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice both firm and gentle. Tell them the truth. Eleanor's breath hitched. But what if they reject it? What if they laugh? What if they turn away? Jesus' eyes, filled with infinite love, bore into hers. Some will reject it, some will mock you, but those who are mine will hear my voice, and when the time comes, they will know which path to take. The words struck deep into her soul, the weight of her mission settled over her, no longer just a burden, but a calling. She thought back to the world she had seen. The deception, the engineered division, the battle for identity, the false security of technology, the slow seduction of control. It was happening. People were already choosing their path, though they did not yet realize it. Eleanor turned toward the horizon, the two roads stretched before her, and in that moment, she knew. She could not force anyone to see. She could not drag them toward the light. But she could speak. She could warn them. She could tell them the truth. And those who were meant to hear, they would. The wind around her grew stronger, pulling her backward, as if she were being yanked from the vision itself. She turned to Jesus one last time, her heart aching. Lord, I don't want to leave, I want to stay with you. Jesus smiled, but his eyes were serious. Your time is not yet finished, Eleanor. There are many who need to hear this. They need to know the truth before it is too late. The pull became stronger. Light swirled around her, her soul being drawn back into the world she had left behind. And as darkness overtook her vision, as the warmth of Jesus' presence faded, she heard his final words echo in her spirit. Go back, Eleanor. Speak. The choice has always been theirs. A sudden force yanked Eleanor backward. The golden horizon blurred, the light dimmed, and the warmth of Jesus' presence faded like the last embers of a dying fire. The vision was slipping away. The air around her thickened, pressing against her chest as though she were being pulled through time itself. Distant echoes of Jesus' final words reverberated in her soul. Go back, Eleanor, speak, the choice has always been theirs. And then darkness. For a brief moment, everything was silent. Then a gasp. Eleanor's eyes snapped open. She was back. Her lungs burned as she sucked in air, her body trembling as though it had been torn from another realm. The world around her was exactly as she had left it, her small, dimly lit room, the flickering glow of a single lamp, the soft hum of the city beyond her window. Yet nothing felt the same. The weight of what she had seen pressed down on her chest, the engineered divide, the battle for identity, the deception masquerading as truth, the two paths. Her hands clenched into fists as reality settled upon her. She had been shown the truth, not just for herself, but for those still blind to it. She stumbled to her feet, her mind racing. What now? She whispered into the silence. There was no audible response, yet, deep within her spirit, she already knew. The mission had begun. She could not return to the life she had once lived, a life of quiet observation, of passive existence. No, she had been called to something greater, to speak, to warn, to awaken those still trapped in illusion. But how? Her gaze fell upon the desk across the room, where an old, worn notebook lay open, its pages empty. It had been months since she had last written in it, her thoughts too scattered, her purpose too unclear. But now she had a story to tell. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, picked up the pen, and pressed its tip against the page. For a moment, she hesitated. The weight of it all loomed over her, the enormity of what lay ahead. Then slowly she began to write. I have seen the truth, and now I must share it, before it is too late. The first words of the mission had been set in motion. There was no turning back. Eleanor sat in the dim glow of her desk lamp, her pen hovering over the pages of her notebook. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the truth she had been entrusted with. She had seen it, the deception, the war for identity, the illusion of peace masking chains of control, the path that led to destruction, wide and inviting, yet lined with unseen traps. She had seen the end of those who walked blindly, lulled into submission by convenience and comfort, never questioning, never resisting, until it was too late. But she had also seen hope, a remnant, a light in the darkness. Those who refused to be deceived, who clung to truth even when the world called them fools. Those who walked the harder road, the narrow path that led to freedom, even as the shadows whispered for them to turn back. And now she had a choice. She could remain silent, bury what she had seen, let the world continue as it was. She could tell herself that no one would listen, that she was just one voice against a roaring tide of lies. Or she could speak. But this wasn't just her choice to make. This was yours. Yes, you, the one reading these words, the one who has felt, deep inside, that something is not right in this world, the one who has sensed a shift, a tightening grip, a slow erosion of truth. You have seen it too, haven't you? The world tells you not to question. It tells you to accept, to obey, to move along with the tide. It convinces you that thinking for yourself is dangerous, that standing apart makes you an enemy. But what if the real danger lies in following blindly? What if the chains are already being fastened, not with force, but with whispered promises of safety and progress? What if this is the moment, the final warning before the point of no return? Eleanor had seen it, and now she was telling you. Will you listen? Or will you wait until the choice is no longer yours to make? Eleanor took a deep breath, staring at the words she had written. The weight of her vision, the revelations that had burned into her soul, felt overwhelming. She had been shown the truth, and now she understood. This wasn't just a message. This was a calling. The world was on the edge, the deception was already tightening its grip. People were walking blindly toward a future they didn't understand, believing the lies, surrendering their freedom, trading their souls for convenience. And yet, in the midst of all this, a light still burned. There were those who could still see, those who could still wake up. That was why she had been sent back, not to convince everyone, but to speak, to warn, to call out to those who would hear. But she couldn't do it alone. This wasn't just her battle, it was yours. Yes, you reading these words, you who feel something stirring inside you, something deep and undeniable. Maybe it's fear, maybe it's recognition, maybe it's the sudden realization that the world you've trusted is not what it seems. But whatever it is, don't ignore it. You were meant to hear this, you were meant to know. Eleanor had made her choice. She would speak, she would stand, she would fight, not with weapons, not with anger, but with truth. Now it's your turn. What will you do with what you've been shown? Will you go back to sleep, dismissing this as just another story? Or will you rise, open your eyes, and step into the battle that has already begun? The enemy doesn't need you to agree with him. He just needs you to do nothing. But you were made for more than that. You were made for truth, for freedom, for purpose. This is your wake-up call. Will you answer it?